Research has indicated that the optimal bedtime for long-term heart health is between 10 and 11 p.m. The first of its kind study used 88,000 patient records and was funded by a grant from the Council of Passive-Aggressive Moms. CPAM. Yeah, fine. Do whatever you want. What do I know? Money.co.uk has ranked Austin the #1 city in the world to relocate to. Said everybody living in Austin, yay. Kamala Harris made 85 minutes of history Friday. While President Biden went under anesthesia for a colonoscopy, Harris briefly became the first woman to hold presidential power. Or, as Fox News reported it, Biden consents to rectal penetration, surrenders power to black woman. And now the main course, inflation. If you don't know what inflation actually is, and you hear about it on TV, you would think that it's pretty scary. Here's the most recent example from Aw Shucks millionaire Chuck Todd on Meet the Press.
This Sunday, inflation fears.
This is the worst it's ever been.
Everything's too high.
Inflation rises to its highest level in 3 decades.
Gas prices are bananas.
Just as the administration predicted, it would be leveling off.
Huh. That sounds bad. What is inflation and why all the fear? Well, inflation is a phenomenon where the average prices of goods and services tends to increase. And a controlled amount of inflation is actually the sign of a healthy, functioning economy. You know, you're growing up, and you should know that it's completely normal to have moderate inflation. It happens to everybody. You see, every individual price, from shoes to sheet metal, is set by supply and demand. Supply is the goods and services that people are selling, and demand is the money that people would agree to pay for it. If supply is more than demand, prices fall. If supply is less than demand, prices rise. Now, individual prices can be volatile, but if you add up all of the spending that everybody does inside the U.S. economy, consumer spending, government spending, investment, and then you account for how much money is coming into or going out of the economy, you get this big, fairly stable number called aggregate demand. And if you add up the entire supply of goods and services available to be bought, that's aggregate supply. The sweet spot for an economy is where these two big numbers stay in balance. And the Federal Reserve is the institution that sets that balance. That's the Federal Reserve's whole job, and that's why they make that Yellen money.
Let's make this one.
By setting interest rates, the Fed can increase or decrease the amount of credit available in the economy. That gas pedal or brake on the supply of credit keeps us in this steady zone of predictably increasing prices. It keeps us at moderate inflation. Importantly, the only control the Fed has is on demand, because demand is money. They don't control supply. If there aren't enough avocados or coal available to fulfill demand in the short term, prices go up. But the Federal Reserve can't mine more coal or grow avocados to bring prices down. All the Fed can do to control prices is make loans harder to get across the whole economy. Now, nobody likes to pay more for stuff, whether it's from a supply shock or from inflation. And increasing prices for basic necessities like groceries and fuel does impact the working class more than the rich. But inflation also causes two other things that are beneficial for people with less money: higher wages and cheaper debt. Wages, to an economist, are just another price, the price at which workers consent to sell their time. And that average price is subject to the same forces of supply and demand as the price of anything else in the market. In periods of inflation, wages tend to rise along with other prices. And that is definitely what we're seeing right now. Average wages have increased in line with other prices. Along with this unusually high inflation, we've seen unusually high wage growth. Or, as the professionally credulous Chuck Todd puts it,
Yes, we have an economic recovery, but inflation is now outstripping the wage gains. As you can see here, year over year, wages are up nearly 5%, but the inflation basically eats all of it and then some, so then we're starting to see some eating into savings.
well, that definitely seems bad. I'm glad Chuck had that graphic made up to show that 4.9 is smaller than 6.2. That must mean that regular working people are getting 1.3% screwed, right? Damn you, Biden! But if you look at the report that this graphic is based on, you start to see why this framing is so misleading. The 6.2% number that Chuck cites, that number includes fuel costs, which are highly volatile compared to other prices. Remember the difference between a supply shock and inflation? This chart, which is literally on the front page of the BLS report, shows how a supply shock in the energy sector is the leading driver of this average price increase. Core prices, which are a more reliable measure of lasting inflation, are only up 4.6%, which, as you may remember from Chuck's graphic, is less than 4.9%. I wonder what's driving up core prices, though. Oh, look, it's new and used cars. Another known temporary supply shock due to the pandemic. Now, I realize it's cold comfort to people trying to make ends meet that fuel and cars are just going to be more expensive for a while until supplies catch up. Even if you're getting a 4.9% raise, your real costs are going up 6.2%, like Chuck's graphics said. But the thing is, that 4.9% rise in wages is just an average across all compensation levels. If you look underneath that number, you'll see that the growth in wages is concentrated in industries with low-wage workers. Many of the people most likely to be hurt by a larger than normal fuel bill are getting historically high raises right now. That's good news. Labor is in demand. At long last, the American worker has a little bit of leverage. Or, as Chuck Todd puts it,
We have a massive problem in the labor market. Some of it's COVID related. Some of it, though, is just we need more workers. Is it time to open the immigration door?
Weird take, but okay. So, fuel and cars aside, it may be that this period of inflation is actually good. I mean, wages are rising and profits are soaring. This obviously isn't at all like the stagflation of the Carter administration, right, Larry Summers?
I think what's happening with oil makes the kind of parallel that I've drawn to the 60s and 70s look more real.
Okay, I get it. Democratic president, a fuel price increase, the word inflation. If you're looking to create fear, then it must be a Carter story. But the reality is, our world is very different from the world in the Carter administration. Back then, people were worried about stagnation and inflation simultaneously, aka stagflation. See, U.S. oil production ramped up predictably for 50 years, all the way from 1920 to 1970. But from 1970 to 1980, for the first time in history, U.S. oil production fell. That, coupled with reductions in foreign oil production, let's not get into what that means, caused an unprecedented decade-long increase in prices. There was not enough supply, and we couldn't create more domestically, so speculators went nuts. By 1980, the price of a barrel peaked at over $134, a record that stood for 28 years. Today, due to advanced drilling technology and massive investments, the United States is the largest oil producer in the world. But many U.S. wells have stopped pumping due to low oil prices during the pandemic. We have more than enough capacity to bring prices back down, but producers have kept production shuttered. They're betting prices won't stay high long enough to make turning on the wells worth it. In other words, oil producers themselves know this isn't a structural problem or a global supply problem. It's a temporary supply shock. In 1980, GDP was falling and unemployment spiked due to fuel-related economic slowdowns. Today, GDP surged 7.8% in one quarter, putting us back on our pre-pandemic trajectory for growth. And employment is below 5% and falling. So, really, what we're seeing right now is not stagflation at all. Our economy is not stagnant, it's growing. This is the story of permanent wage increases and temporary pandemic-related costs. The raises that people are getting right now aren't going to be eaten by fuel and car costs forever, which means they are, in fact, substantial raises to people's purchasing power. And when you think about it that way, this inflation is actually a good thing. But there's a reason you won't hear that side of the story from mainstream talking heads like Chuck Todd, or economists like Larry Summers, or, unfortunately, even from Joe Delaware Corporation Biden. The reason you always hear about the bad side of inflation is debt. You see, the prices for goods and services may increase or decrease tomorrow, but debts...
I get older, they stay the same age.
That's almost right, Matt. Debt stays the same price. Your wages can go up, and the price of bread can go up, but the payments on that semester at college you did 10 years ago stay the same. That means that rising wages, even when they're being offset by other rising prices, reduce the number of hours you have to work to pay your debts. The same amount of sweat pays for a larger amount of debt. And that's something Chuck Todd conveniently ignores. To hear Chuck, or Tucker, or Larry Summers, or even Pod Save America describe it, inflation is a big, scary problem, and we need to get it under control. It's bad for poor people. And remember Carter? Inflation make Biden weak. Make people mad. Want Reagan. Make fire. But the reality is this. Inflation is not necessarily bad for working class people. If wages are rising, and they are, it's actually very good for working class people. The ones who stand to lose the most from inflation are not the working class, but, surprise, surprise, big business. Banks, mortgage companies, auto loan providers, credit card companies, they all lose future revenue when people can pay off debts. Companies that rely on low-wage workers like Amazon, Walmart, fast food chains, retail, anywhere that's suddenly having to increase wages right now, none of them are happy about paying workers more. So, the largest lobbying spender in the world, the Chamber of Commerce, has gotten behind this inflation scare campaign. And they're trying to use it to whittle away the social infrastructure bill. Oh, hey, look, it's Larry Summers again. Big business is actively trying to prevent the working class from making any more material gains. Because if American workers keep negotiating for higher wages, maybe they won't need to take out another credit card or refinance their mortgage to make ends meet. Maybe they won't have to settle for the job with no benefits or the full-time gig that doesn't pay enough to live on. For the first time since the Reagan administration, American workers are demanding their share of the profits. And despite the fact that business lobbies have already cut the Biden legislative agenda to bits, passing even some relief for workers and their families could help them maintain leverage. Economics is the language of power, and if you don't know how it's being used, it will be used against you. No matter what Chuck Todd and Tucker Carlson and the Chamber of Commerce all want you to believe, the sky is not falling. The hard numbers show that corporate profits are soaring, that the economy has rebounded spectacularly post-Delta surge, wages are rising in jobs that have been underpaid for decades, and unemployment is falling. Increased inflation isn't some harbinger of doom. It's the sign of a global economy roaring back to life and workers finally getting some of what they deserve. So, the next time you see a headline about inflation designed to make you afraid, just remember, when it comes to corporate spin, it's a free market, so don't buy it. Oh, hey look, it's Larry Summers again. Oh no. Bad look, Larry. Bye!
Let's make this one.